A multi-million-dollar lawsuit sees a Black Lives Matter activist accuse an executive of stealing. Will her high-profile legal action prove a death blow to the organization, or could it be the reset button the movement needs? We'll debate that with the plaintiff on this program. I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is Black Lives Matter. Well, racial injustice takes many forms in the United States. Being black means you're more likely to be poor or in prison, as well as lack proper health care and access to better legal counsel. But since the first slave ship sailed up to Jamestown, Virginia in 1619, there have been resistance movements that have also taken many forms, from rebellions to organizations including the NAACP and the Rainbow Push Coalition. Now, their efforts helped make it possible for a hashtag to inspire millions of activists to say Black Lives Matter. And while the organization's meteoric rise caught America's white establishment off guard, it also led to serious questions over whether that success and the money that flowed in was too much of a temptation for BLM's leaders. Here's more now from Ahad Al-Fadli.
No justice, no peace. Prosecute the police.
It's been a while since Black Lives Matter protests have grabbed international headlines. That's until now. Infighting among activists has been simmering for months, and it will soon head into a courtroom. This is the BLM executive for the group's Global Network Foundation, Shalomyan Bowers. He's being accused by this grassroots BLM organizer, Melina Abdullah, of stealing $10 million. In court documents, she says Bowers used the BLM's fundraising arm as his own personal piggy bank. Bowers denies the allegations and accuses Abdullah's colleagues of giving themselves monthly stipends of $10,000. He's characterized the pay as exorbitant for people he says are supposed to be volunteer leaders. Black Lives Matter executives have faced similar accusations in the past. Following the 2020 murder of George Floyd, BLM was transformed from being a hashtag to a multi-million-dollar organization, as the nonprofit took in $90 million in donations. It was then that questions were being asked of BLM co-founder Patrisse Cullors, who oversaw the purchase of a $6 million compound.
We looked at commercial buildings, we looked at, homes, and then we found this really amazing space that's a sweet spot between commercial and residential, that has office spaces, that has parking, that has, yes, a home on the property, but also has a sound stage where you could do podcasts and you could do live events in the backyard.
But her defense of such spending would be met by an increasing chorus of criticism by Black activists and BLM opponents. And as Cullors' personal wealth soared, she eventually stepped down as the executive director of BLM's foundation. While Shalomyan Bowers tries not to share a similar fate, many are asking where the Black Lives Movement goes from here, and whether it still represents the people who took to the streets in the hundreds of thousands not too long ago. Ahad Fadli, the Newsmakers.
So does this infighting spell the demise of the BLM movement, or can it bounce back stronger, assuming it still holds value in the community? Well, joining me now to talk about that are from Los Angeles, Melina Abdullah. She is a Black Lives Matter grassroots organizer and the plaintiff in the lawsuit against the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation. Also in Los Angeles is her attorney in this case, Walter Mosley. And from Washington is Kelechi Egwim. He is the executive director of the Black empowerment organization Appeal. Now, we did reach out for a representative from BLM to appear on this program, but unfortunately, we received no response. But Melina, as you know, they have put out several statements in response to your lawsuit. So I'd like to start with those. And I must say, some are quite harsh because not only do they deny all the accusations you've laid out, they also accuse you of working against the interests of the very community you say you serve. So first, let's look at this. They claim that they requested multiple times to meet or go through private mediation to resolve this in order to, and I'm quoting them, not fall victim to the carceral logic and social violence that fuels the legal system. They say you either ignored or refused their requests. First of all, is that true?
Sure. So first, thank you for having me. And I'll add that I am not the plaintiff. I am one of many plaintiffs. I'm an original member of Black Lives Matter, an organizer and co-founder of Black Lives Matter Los Angeles, and also one of the folks who brought the chapters together and have been working collectively since 2013. So I want to make sure that we offer that. I also want to push back against the idea that this is quote unquote infighting. The people that we are fighting against have never been on the ground. They are not Black Lives Matter organizers. They are paid consultants who've never even been to a protest. And so what we're fighting against, it's the organizers of Black Lives Matter, it's the boots on the ground versus highly paid consultants who want to appropriate our dollars, our platforms, and our good name of Black Lives Matter. What they're alleging is an absolute lie. And my attorney, who was present for some of the time that we engaged in trying to settle this quietly. This has been 6 months since they stole our resources. It first happened in March of 2022. We began by reaching out to them. When they didn't respond in a way that was helpful, we actually engaged organizing community and tried to have a calling in. So we had everyone from pretty much every chapter of Black Lives Matter to organizers that you know, like Shaun King, to families of those killed by police, reach out to the Global Network Foundation, which is not Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter grassroots is Black Lives Matter and can be seen in many of these videos that you're showing, marching and demonstrating and advocating for Black life. We're Black Lives Matter. Everyone reached out to the Global Network Foundation. We sent private letters, and they refused to respond.
Okay, I do very much appreciate that clarification that you gave at the beginning there, because it is so important. I mean, getting rid of these kinds of misunderstandings or, you know, mischaracterizations of what's happening can lead to sometimes unfair reputational damage. So thank you for that. Let me take it a little bit further, though, and Walter, I'm going to take this up with you, because they also argue in their statements that Melina is taking legal action because, and I'm quoting them now, she would rather take the same steps of our white oppressors and utilize the criminal legal system, which is propped up by white supremacy, the same system they say they want to dismantle, to solve movement disputes. So you are part of that legal system. Are you using the system against BLM's own best interests?
I mean, that's just such an outrageous statement and comment. GNF, our Global Network Foundation, hired government lawyers, government cops, individuals that lead the police, and then decided to use those and weaponize those lawyers against grassroots. They are now turning those weapons towards Dr. Abdullah, and to assert that we've done it is outrageous. I've certainly filed a lawsuit, but that's after 6 months of negotiation with the police, i.e. the lawyer of grassroots, and they're multiple, the lawyer of Global GNF, and there are multiple lawyers they've hired. So at no point are we weaponizing any system. They are afraid because they continue to be under investigation by the IRS. They continue to be under investigation by various state attorney generals. That is not of our doing. That is of their own malfeasance and misdoing.
Okay, let me turn to Kelechi. Because as I mentioned, you know, this can cause unfair, sometimes reputational damage just because it is out there in the press and it's being spoken about. This case has not yet been taken to court, so we can't say for certain who may be in the wrong here. So what really is at risk here, not just, for BLM, but for the wider community who put their hopes and their voices into this movement?
Yeah, that's a good question, and thank you for inviting me to share. And let me first of all clarify that of course, you know this, but I'm not a part of any particular BLM organization. Of course, we've worked with and supported BLM DC in the past. Well, obviously, we have
I just need to repeat that you are very much an advocate for Black empowerment. So along similar lines, yeah.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. But I just wanted to make the distinction.
No
I'm
problem.
not a party to either party of
So
the
good
lawsuit.
objective observer. Go ahead.
Exactly. So unfortunately, even though Sister Melina just said it, there's no infighting. Clearly, there's infighting. I mean, Black Lives Matter is not just the people in the streets; it's the people who advocate for the policies that people in the streets are marching for. So I mean, it's not really true to say that there's no infighting, but that and the visual effect of it is obviously is that it appears that there's discourse, but there's this discord. But of course, there are real structural issues that are simply coming to play, and it's not really unique to Black Lives Matter. Matter of fact, I believe Steve Bannon, the president's henchman or spokesperson, brain, whatever you want to characterize him, is currently being arraigned right now because of misappropriation of funds that was intended to build a wall, as they said. Whenever you
Sure.
have grassroots, so-called grassroots efforts, whether they actually are grassroots or not, and we have people who are raising money from common people who don't necessarily have a specific reason for donating that money. Sometimes it's because of a passion, sometimes it's guilt, whatever the reason is, and money comes in, but there's no real structural plan, a way to actually manage that money. It becomes so much of it, it causes these issues. So this is not a problem specific to a Black Lives Matter. This is just what happens when an organization sort of outgrows the
Right.
boundaries.
We
of
know
acceptance
this is a
for itself.
problem across, NGOs and not-for-profits all around the world. The problem is, though, it is happening in such a visible and loud forum. It is all over the media. And what I was asking about is what that really risks for the community for whom this is supposed to serve. And it serves a very important purpose, especially in this day and age, and the fight against wider racism in the United States.
So
Right.
if I could respond, if
Okay,
If I could
go ahead. Yeah.
I just want to clarify, when I said this is not infighting, I want to be clear that when you hire a paid consultant and he pays himself $2.2 million in a single reporting period and has never been on the front lines, including on the front lines of policy making, that's not infighting. We're the insiders. They are the hired paid consultants. So I don't want to cast it as infighting, because this person who you're now showing, Shalomyan Bowers, was never inside the movement. So it's not infighting. It is a fight, and it's a public fight. And I do want to respond to what you're saying. Yes, this is damaging to Black Lives Matter. We did not want to go public. We did not want to, file a lawsuit. However, do you just let these paid consultants run off with the dollars, run off with the platforms, and run off with the good name of Black Lives Matter? Or do you stand in integrity and say what they're doing is not right? And we were forced, after 6 months of trying to negotiate, after 6 months, I sat with his attorney for 3 days.
I realize, you do say that you made the efforts and that it's unfortunate, in your opinion as well, that it has come to this point. But, I mean, you're saying that these people are completely removed as consultants, but he was hired specifically by, the founder of the organization. So it's hard to really believe that there's that much distance between whom you say are the real BLM activists and these consultants they've hired.
Well, there's a Global Network Foundation, which I've actually never been a part of, never worked for them, never had any decision-making power. And there's Black Lives Matter Grassroots, which is the boots on the ground and is a separate organization, is the original formation of Black Lives Matter.
Okay, Melina, let me ask you quickly, if you lose this lawsuit, what happens? What happens to BLM?
Well, we're in the same position we're currently in. And we built from nothing. And if we don't win in court, and our prayer is actually that they will have a come to Jesus, come to Allah, come to whoever their creator is moment, and we won't have to go to court. Our prayer is that the public calling out will encourage them to do the right thing and hand the resources over to the people who birthed, built, and fuel the movement. But if we don't win, we'll continue to fight and continue to build. That's what we did in 2013. In 2013, we didn't have a dollar and we didn't have a follower. And so we'll build from where we are. We're not going to give up the fight for Black Lives Matter. We say this is a fight for the soul of Black Lives Matter.
Okay, Kelechi, let me come back to you quickly. Walter, I will return to you, but I need to ask Kelechi first. I mean, is this really a case of an organization with good intentions getting too big, too fast? And do you think that BLM, can come back after this, especially if this lawsuit has been lost and too much reputational damage been done by that point?
Right. Well, I mean, it's obviously an organization that, and organization is really loose. I'm using that very, very loosely because in 2013, Black Lives Matter was essentially a hashtag, and that was a very important hashtag because it allowed us to really connect the dots all over the country. I'm not using that to minimize the power and effect of it, but to say that to refer to Black Lives Matter as an organization, which is what the media does, and I blame the media for a lot of this confusion. The truth is that it has always been, loosely managed, loosely controlled. The local chapters pretty much run themselves. The funding comes from sources that are not necessarily even aligned with the mission of Black Lives Matter, because it comes from people, oftentimes large corporations, that are trying to get rid of their guilt by sending money. And the truth is that the Black Lives Matter is not a thing in and of itself, in the sense that it's part of a continuum. We're talking about Black liberation that goes back, the fight goes back for 500 years actually in this part of the world. So the continuum between Black Lives Matter and the Black Panthers and the UNIA, that's where the disconnect is. There should always have been the intent to support legacy organizations that have been doing this work. Black Lives Matter wasn't the reason why there was LA was burnt down after Rodney King. The idea that Black Lives Matter is solely responsible and therefore owed all the resources that have been thrown into this fight is part of the problem. In other words, this is really money that should have been spread out through all these legacy organizations that continue to do the work and will be around and have been around and will be around for hundreds of years. In terms of Black Lives Matter by itself, I mean, the reputation has been marred by the misuse or abuse of the funds that have been thrown in. So you can't erase that. But the folks who believe in the mission of Black Lives Matter, the mission of Black empowerment, mission of Black power, we're not going anywhere. The Black Lives Matter.
Kelechi, is Black Lives Matter still needed as a movement in the community?
Well, I don't think it was ever a movement. I think it was a hashtag, and many, many small organizations that use that hashtag. It's like saying, is Black Power still needed? Black Power is not an organization. I mean, so to talk about it as an organization is actually a mischaracterization of reality. It's really a cadre of similarly minded organizations with a singular purpose, working together, trying to achieve that purpose. Not necessarily there was an umbrella that was controlling it, and I think that's part of the problem.
Okay.
You say that the global network is not grassroots, but you think that they owe you money because they're not Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter, of course, created the global network. So the disconnect in the structure and lack of structure is really what's the cause of this problem. And in order to really come to terms, there has to be complete honesty on both sides of this. End of the day, the work that is supposed to be done is not really being focused on as we speak.
So Walter, let me come back to you because we actually introduced this
Yeah.
as, is this going to actually serve the organization to build back stronger, to bounce back from this
Sure.
and understand how to run the organization even better, to make it more effective so that, this kind of infighting or whatever you want to call it doesn't happen again. So if you win, let me ask you, if you win, what will you do with that money? What will you do with BLM?
Well, the first point is my office is working diligently with a number of other lawyers on this particular lawsuit. Dr. Abdullah and the people of BLM and grassroots are fighting every day the same fight they've always had. So the work hasn't stopped. I'd like Dr. Abdullah maybe to continue and talk about what the work currently is and where she's off to next and where they're off to build. But what they do on the street and what they do for our people doesn't stop. This lawsuit is being handled by professionals. We are working to secure the resources and the tools and bring them back home. But the fight on the ground, the fight of BLM continues.
Okay, then Melina, tell me where you see your future in the organization.
Sure. So I appreciate, Walter, we are continuing to fight. So you don't see the fight because we don't have access to our resources. We don't have access to our social media platforms. And so we've been on the ground in Buffalo helping to rebuild after our loved ones were slaughtered inside Tops grocery store. We've been on the ground in Akron after Jalen Walker was murdered. We're on the ground in Los Angeles. We have protests every single week challenging police associations that bully and bribe elected officials and shield killer cops from accountability. And next week will be, after 8.5 years in Tampa, Florida, challenging qualified immunity and standing with the family of Andrew Joseph III. I'm sorry that Brother Kelechi is not as familiar with the work that we do every single day on the front lines, and welcome him into kind of familiarizing himself with the work of Black Lives Matter, which is a group of organized chapters that do meet. We are a movement. We are an organization. Unfortunately, the Global Network Foundation is not part of that formation. It's always been the chapters on the ground and the boots on the ground leading that work. We hope that you will also cover our work during this 2-week trial, especially around Andrew Joseph III, who was 14 years old when he was killed as a result of police misconduct in Tampa, Florida. And the police have used qualified immunity to block his family from even having a day in court. So it's been 8.5 years in the making. And we're advocating for policy in DC. Brother Kelechi, I hope you help us with the End Qualified Immunity Act that Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley has introduced and we've endorsed and are continuing to fight for. So the future of Black Lives is the future of Black liberation.
Let me ask Kelechi quickly, that we're down to our last minute. I mean, has anything you've heard then over the course of this panel discussion convinced you to think any differently of Black Lives Matter and the movement, where it's going and what its future could be?
Well, I think we're stuck on nomenclature. I mean, we're actually not in disagreement in terms of the heart of the matter. But the point is that the movement is not just limited to Black Lives Matter. In other words, Black Lives Matter is a segment of Black liberation. At least that's the intent of the Black Lives Matter slogan and those that support it. The greater work. I mean, you're talking about work on with Congress people, which regarding reparations, regarding police brutality, regarding all types of all aspects of the reforms and changes that we need. It's not all so. To talk about Black Lives Matter as if it's an isolated incident, therefore responsible for, and if you're not part of Black Lives Matter, you're not part of the movement. That's sort of confusing.
Kelechi, let me just ask you then quickly. I mean, if you could kind of advise the movement, you're familiar with running, not-for-profits and NGOs. I mean, would there be a model you would like to see them follow from organizations that have best served the community and have really made the difference that you would want to see manifest?
Oh, absolutely. But obviously, we're working backwards. I mean, there are legacy organizations. I mean, I would recommend Sister talk to attorney Nkechi Taifa, who runs the roundtable that really focuses on Black liberation, you know, especially in policy matters. I don't distinguish between those in the streets and those in the office. They're doing the same work. The folks in the streets are not going to have meetings with the folks that need to actually make the changes. So it's not a either or. It has to be a collaborative effort. I think more collaboration, and sometimes you got to let go of the money for the purpose of the movement itself.
Good advice. Kelechi, you will have to have the final word. We are so unfortunately out of time for this edition of The Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists sincerely so much for being with us, and our viewers, of course, for tuning in as well. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.